Well, let's just find some time to sit together and in community. Oh, nice people are saying hello from around the world. This is just wonderful. Let's enjoy our time sitting together. your mind has wandered, just being generous with yourself, regathering your attention for these last few minutes of formal practice together. Let's enjoy 3 more breaths together before I ring the bell. You can raise your eyes, wiggle your fingers and toes a bit if you need to. I'll actually invite you to looking out beyond your screen. Maybe take a look out the window. Take a look around the room. Close your eyes, find something pleasing or beautiful. Wherever in the world you might be. And welcome back. So thank you all. We've got such a worldwide Sangha here. I mean, truly, Sangha Live. Here we are. This is not my first time here, but it is really a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Sangha Live and the team behind the scenes who do a phenomenal job of putting these events together. I always feel like when things go smoothly on the teacher end and on the student end, it means that people are working very, very hard behind the scenes. Like that kind of, what's the metaphor about the duck paddling so hard to stay afloat underwater? But that's where we are. So thank you. And so I'm here to talk about Danna, generosity. I think my joking title was, not just the guilt trip at the end of the retreat. Right. Many of us, if we sat on retreat, we don't get a receipt necessarily for our generosity. But people ask for a donation. People ask for this generosity. It's how these teachings have been able to continue all the way up until the present. So I want to start by just saying a bit about the Buddha. And I think a lot of us know that he offered both a diagnosis and prescription for life's challenges with the Four Noble Truths. And the way I kind of think of those is, first he said, life is suffering. Or you might think, suffering is a part of life, or life is pretty stressful. And that stress and suffering, number two, is often caused by wanting some things, not wanting other things, and just the kind of general confusion that we all feel in this really particular very confusing and overwhelming world. The good news, truth number three, it doesn't have to be this way. And number four, there's a way out. And that's known as the Eightfold Path. And so a lot of us, because we're here, we know this to be true. We know some of this to be true, really based on ehipassiko, investigating ourselves, our own experience. That feeling of like when we don't have that job, that house, that partner, that car, whatever it is that we want, right? We feel stressed, we feel suffering, right? When we do, we're hanging on to all of them, right? And even if they feel like they're perfect, there's still that like, couldn't they be like a little more perfect? Or, what's the Trungpa Rinpoche, you're perfect just as you are, but you could use a little work, right? Like, couldn't, my partner use a little work, my job be just a little bit better, right? So we get those things that we think we want, and we're still stressed, right? When those people in our lives don't act the exact way we want them to, we still get stressed out. So if we think about a lot of the stress and suffering in our lives to be the result of desire, is what the Buddha taught, right? We can then see that the amount of suffering is often like directly correlated with the urgency of that desire. And then the solution kind of becomes clear, right? What's in many ways the opposite. And I love that about so many of the Buddhist lessons. It's like the 3 this, the 5 that, and here's the antidote, and here's the opposite. And that's probably because of the oral tradition as I understand it, but it's very helpful for remembering this stuff. So if craving, attachment, greed, desire leads to suffering, what's the opposite, right? Generosity, right? Generosity allows us to detach, allows us to make room for more to come in, and as a bonus, be a benefit to others. And actually, we'll talk too about how it's quite beneficial for us ourselves at the same time. And the solution, like many things that are both spiritual and scientific, it's simple, but it's not necessarily easy, because the truth is we're up against pretty strong odds, right? We're up against more selfish angels of our nature, our DNA. Evolutionary psychology and our hard wiring tells us that we want more than we need. And that's why so many people hoard more than they need. They really think that they need it in order to survive. It's this bug in our wiring. We're also up against nurture, not just nature, in the 21st century. We live in this culture that is not just, that's also global. In fact, I was just traveling a lot this year and seeing this is not just a Western, quote unquote, Western or North American phenomenon, right? But the cultures bombard us with these messages, constantly telling us that getting that thing is going to be what makes us happy, more so than giving, right? The economy is not doing well, right? You got to go buy. Well, never forget, I was like 22, 23 when 9/11 happened. And I remember George W. Bush saying, go out and shop. That's what you should do. Like, that's quite a message after a, enormous national tragedy, right? This is the message that we get despite nearly every spiritual, philosophical tradition out there, including neuroscience, kind of current belief system today. So there's that lasting health, lasting happiness comes through giving, not through getting or the pursuit of getting. I think it's Jack Kornfield who says, our culture creates these unlimited desires in a world of limited resources. Okay. You can see that all over the place on this unseasonably warm day, the effects of that deep in November where I live, right? And in fact, the opposite is true. The culture of limited desires is the only way that we can live sustainably, not limit our resources, right? It's no wonder that the Buddha then talked about his path is an act of rebellion, swimming upstream against the currents of society, swimming upstream even against the currents of our nature. I just kind of think, what if we got as many messages telling us to give as much as we get, right? When you think about, the new iPhone comes out, people camped out in lines around the block to get it, and I love my iPhone too. I'm not, no judge, right? But, what if, people were camped out to, for a new charity that was launching, right? Or to give in some ways, right? And that's not how it is, unfortunately, but maybe we can start with us. And I want to finish today by actually talking about how, I know we all hear, start with yourself. And I'm often like, but I want that other person to start, right? And yet it actually does. The science actually tells us generosity is actually a contagion, a social contagion in a really good way, right? We can call it karma. We can call it interpersonal neurobiology. It describes the same thing, but it does actually start with us. And so it's sort of a shame that we need to teach generosity or practice it. And I did share that the selfishness is wired into us, but actually generosity is wired into us too. The happiness it brings us. We're being on a retreat with Chaz DeCapua, who's a local teacher here in Massachusetts, where I am, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, by the way, in the USA. He was saying, imagine a 2-year-old walking up to you with something that he wants to share. They're just so excited, that delight in their face, right? Let me show you this thing I made, or this spaghetti creation, or whatever it is, right? They're just so delighted, right? And we too often feel that when we're sharing something excitingly. And then you imagine that 2-year-old, right, when they want something, like that 2-year-old in the checkout line, you want something, right? Like the response is like rage, inconsolable grief, right? All of it. I've got 2 kids, maybe part of why I had part of the meditation muted, because there was some wanting happening in the background, right? But there, there's that, that just suffering that happens with wanting something, right? We adults might hopefully not stomp our feet and scream, but we're not that far off in terms of how civilized or grown up we are, right? Those attachments to the strong opinions that we are right. Those attachments to, that thing that we want, to get to the place on time, and how much the traffic's driving us crazy. Or, a lot of us who've maybe struggled with really wanting that drink or that drug or that behavior, all these other things, just wanting it to be different, right? So from the material to the substance to, holding strong to our opinions, right? Just try arguing online and, get a taste of that suffering. Fall into that trap more than I would like to, right? But yet that seed of generosity, right? It's there, like all natural things, right? The seed is there. It needs attention. It needs cultivation. It needs practice to grow, to blossom, to become its own habit, right? Through, again, neuroplasticity, through karma, whatever we want to call it. And like so many other values, generosity is hardly monopolized by Buddhism or Eastern philosophy. Christianity has virtues. Judaism emphasizes doing for others. Hinduism, Islam speak of alms. Jainism, Sikhism, indigenous traditions the world over all emphasize sharing. There's no monopoly. But we are here to talk a little bit about the Buddhist context here. And what the Buddha described, what people said he described, is giving, right? Danna. Unconditional giving, which is like, unconditional part makes it a little tough. And the Buddha also instructed, though, that we give within our means and what feels good to give. With the highest forms of giving, without expectation of being paid back, right? Not even paid back with gratitude, right? So, we often are expecting a thank you or recognition of some kind, right? It's that kind of giving, if you're a parent or a parent of an animal or anything like that, right? It's that kind of giving, right? Without the martyrdom, guilt trip stuff. And when we give what's best, as the Buddha also described, right? We give the best of what we know, right? Passing on good wisdom, right? Not passing on the mistakes, but what we've learned, the wisdom we've learned from life's challenges and the mistakes that we've made along the way too. And then I think there's also this something of a koan of how do we find the middle path? What's generosity and what's obligation? Like this comes up for me a lot as a parent. Okay? What's being generous to my kids and what's like, well, I do have to feed them, right? Or what's generosity and what's spoiling? Or in some of our other relationships, what's generosity and what's enabling? Right? When we think about, the behaviors of people in our lives, what's generosity and what's, setting a good boundary, right? These are really tricky questions. And I think that for me, mindfulness helps us with the discernment around this and the reminder of that what we're aiming for is the middle path. And I always am just like, oh, phew, great, got that middle path thing. don't have to be perfect. Thank you, middle path. Right? So these are some things to chew on, right? What's generosity, what's obligation, and what's generosity and what's spoiler and enabling in our lives, as well as what's generosity toward ourselves. I remember I still do a lot of work around kind of mindfulness in kids and asking Megan Cohen, who started Mindful Schools, one of the founders of Mindful Schools, like, well, how do we set our prices for doing this work? And she said, well, what's generous to everybody? What's generous to you as well as what's generous to the folks that you're, going to be doing some work for. And I think that's a really helpful guide and in many kind of business dealings. I'm sort of a freelancer in many ways in my life, right? What's generous to everybody. So types of generosity, intentions behind it. Buddhism talks about different types of giving in terms of our intentions, which in the kind of Buddhist cosmology is about different kinds of merit that we accrue and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to keep it a little bit more grounded. But giving with characteristics, for example, that means giving for a reason, repayment of some kind, financial repayment or otherwise, right? Maybe that's, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But it's like, writing a thank you note, bringing flowers when you're invited to dinner, right? That's a good thing. Good things, happen for everybody when we do that. Right? They get flowers, we get dinner, right? All that kind of thing. Our brain feels satisfied. It feels kind of full with the transaction. So does the other person. And social reciprocity is really important. It holds families together. It holds friendships together, sanghas, society, right? All of that. Right? And there's generosity with characteristics and intention. And that's the kind of like giving with an agenda, right? The intention of gaining recognition, right? Even the intention actually in Buddhism of gaining merit. They're being reciprocated in this other way, right? Giving a building to your local meditation center, giving, I don't know what that would be here, giving a new server to Sangha Live or something like that. Or you give a big tip because you hope your date is going to notice, right? These are still good deeds, right? But there's, motives are a little bit more mixed, and actually so is our karma in the spiritual sense. And actually, so is what's happening in our brain scientifically. We're not actually getting the same positive benefits too, right? Because we might feel disappointed. We don't get that second date after we, showed off with a big tip, or we don't end up enlightened, or, whatever it might be, or the center is not named after us, right? So it's a setup for disappointment, right? No expectations, no disappointment, right? What's that saying? Expectations are disappointments waiting to happen. So the more there's that kind of second agenda, the more unhappy we are likely to be, because there's attachment to outcome. And so our karma, our happiness, spiritually, our brains, all of it kind of take a hit. So giving without characteristics is ideal, no hidden agenda, no room to be disappointed, right? But, again, it is what it is. When we step away from expectations and attachment, we enjoy the purest benefit of generosity, and so does the other person. The more transactional it is, the more opportunity for disappointment, unhappiness, exploitation. Again, it is what it is. None of us are perfect. I think a lot about when I was in second grade, there's this kid, my parents were like super health people, right? I got like celery and carrot sticks for lunch. I was like, this sucks. And everyone else got Twinkies and everything like that. And I remember this other kid in second grade, like he clearly really wanted to be my friend. And he was like, I'll trade you your Twinkies for your carrots. And I was like, this is a great deal, right? For a second grader. And I remember just like knowing, right, in my heart, right, this isn't quite right. I didn't really want to be friends with this guy. He definitely didn't really want the carrot sticks and celery sticks, right? Actually, I remember talking about it with my parents, and they were kind of like, yeah, like, I think do the right thing, let's, be real about what this means. And so I think also when we look at our own lives, right, with generosity, and we look at that with a rigorous honesty in some ways, right? For me anyway, often the main regrets, right, the main resentments, when I think about times I've been generous or tried to be generous, are often when I expected something in return. When I was secretly holding on to, attached to, right, that kind of mental IOU, keeping score, right, which is exhausting and feels kind of lousy, right? Holding on in that way, because it just leads to more resentment, and it's not true generosity in quite the same way. So what's the kind of giving that you're doing in your life, that we're all doing? Again, none of it's right or wrong. It's just how do we find a nice balance of this and push ourselves a little bit, right? What are we doing with family, especially the holidays, right? And expectations, with friends, with work, other invisible strings, expectations, or other very visible ones, which can also be really helpful sometimes to know I'm paying you for this and I'm expecting this in return. It's a clear transaction. There's less room sometimes for misunderstanding, right? It's not that these are, a problem. It's like, how do we work this out? We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be honest with other people, right? About whether there's other agendas. And again, that discernment of what's duty, what's obligation, what's generosity, what's spoiling, what's given with expectation or with kind of unconscious expectation. These are all questions to consider. So the Buddha talked too about the types of gifts that we can give. A few categories. Number one, the gift of wealth or material stuff. Number two, the gift of protection, spiritual and emotional support. And then three, the gift of wisdom or dharma. And conversely, they'll have, greed and desire, right? We desire wealth, we desire protection, we desire wisdom, right? That spiritual materialism. But let's talk about the generosity around these. So the Buddha advises that we share what we can afford to, right? And also to share the best of what we have, right? The best stuff, the best support, the best spirit, the best wisdom and dharma, right? And every spiritual tradition is, not the exact amount, but the kind of percent of the whole, right? We all have something that we can give, right? And so the benefit to others is how much you do give from what you have, what kind of percent in a sense. So the idea is not to give so much that we then create more suffering for ourselves, or that we create more suffering for others, right? That I'm giving everything away, and my family is doesn't have anywhere to live necessarily, or something like that. I'm creating more suffering, but enough so that we feel that kind of internal resistance, right? Generosity is it's a habit. It's something that we want to build like a muscle, right? We just feel that little bit of a pinch, right? When we give something away, it's like, ooh, right? You can kind of feel it in your body when you tune in. You can feel it spiritually when it's like going to the gym, right? If you go to the gym and you just, lift like 1 pound weights, most of us, right? Not a lot going on. You have to feel like a little something. Same with generosity. You got to feel it a little bit. It doesn't quite count. And it is again just so important to kind of think about why we're doing this. And again, all of our motives are always mixed. Even the Dalai Lama says something like, "Don't just be kind and generous because it's good." Right? Do it because it's also good for you. It is good for you. It's good for your merit, all of that, right? If you make yourself happy, you're making the world a better place. So it is okay to have mixed motives. We don't have to be perfectly pure in everything. I think, to me, what a lot of these teachings are about is the awareness of what our intentions, what our motivations are, or just more awareness than we had yesterday, really. And so giving material, right, this first form of giving, it can mean money, stuff, medicine, shelter, right? Even our bodies, right? A wealthy person can give away millions if they have billions, right? But we all do have something we can give. And I actually really like that message from the Buddha, because it reminds us that we do all have something we can give. We have something valuable inside of all of us. Right? And so trying to, again, push ourselves a little bit, right? If you're introverted, maybe it's hard to share words of wisdom, right? But maybe you can share wisdom through a quiet example, quiet deeds. I remember when I was young, in my 20s, kind of a Dharma junkie, had a lot of time, but not a lot of money, right? Which kind of shifts as we get older. I've got a little bit more money and a lot less time in my life. But thinking about what else I had, right? I had physical strength, right? I couldn't donate a lot, but I had time I could donate. I had, my body I could donate to help out neighbors and things like that. And I loved going on retreats. And I couldn't usually afford them. It's a challenge, but a lot of retreat centers are generous in other ways, generous to everybody, right? And I think if I given, just if they'd given me the retreat for free, I probably wouldn't have invested in quite the same way. But I remember, going to different retreat centers, they'd be like, well, do a little extra Dharma job, do extra yogi job, can you, scrub the kitchen, a couple hours afterwards, and that kind of thing, right? So again, I didn't have the money, but I could find what it was that I could give, right? Giving my body, giving my strength, giving my time, right? These days don't have quite so much of those things, but I've got a little more money I can give maybe, right? We can give, some of our old stuff to charity. We can just try to live a more simple life with less stuff in it. And when we give also, and again, I think about the holidays coming up, right? Science also tells us that better than just giving things, we can give experiences. And I really love this idea. If you have enough to give materially, the research says if you give experiences, give museum tickets, give show tickets, give, like a little, travel adventure, right? These kinds of things, go to a restaurant, giving cooking lessons, right? That kind of thing is not a thing, right? It's an experience that actually creates more lasting happiness for that person. Every time they cook that recipe from that class they took, right? It brings them joy over and over again. So we can think about the ways that we want to give stuff and material and give with the material that we do have. Secondly, this idea of the gift of protection, support, altruism, right? And the same drive of altruism to protect others, right? It drives so many people. I'm a therapist. That's my day job, right? So I feel kind of self-righteous about that. Right? No, I'm giving all the time, right? But many people in their work are in it to help others, right? So many kinds of people. Thinking too, right? If it's not just, in our work, what are other aspects of our life where we can give, the gift of protection, physical, emotional. You don't have to make a career out of it, but we can give a shoulder to cry on. We can give an ear to listen to someone. We can give advice, right? Maybe not unsolicited advice, but we can give that. We can give a generosity of spirit, which I think is a really important one, right? Can be generous with forgiving in a boundaried way. But can I explore that a little bit in a way that's safe for me and safe for others? I think a lot about, I live in a city. There's a lot of people who are asking for money, and I never know what to do. I don't know what the right thing to do is spiritually. I don't know what the right thing to do is economically. I think a lot of us struggle with this. And I have kids I walk around with, and they often ask me. And the one thing I have figured out when I encounter someone asking for money is I give them my attention. I don't look away. I look them in the eyes and I say, sorry, not today. Have a great day. Right? Give them the gift of seeing them as another human. And I think, is that the right thing? I think it's a right thing. It's not a wrong thing. Right? I know that. And I think that's a good example to set to other people, to see others as human. We can give, in other simple ways. A few weeks ago, a lot of us woke up feeling not great in my country. Half of us in my country woke up feeling pretty lousy. And someone held the door for me when I was going to the gym. And it was just like, wow, what a little thing. Right? When I was just in my head and feeling all kinds of feelings, but that someone was just generous with holding the door in this small way. So really thinking about, giving doesn't have to be this huge thing. And giving too, again, giving the best of what we have. I used to think about kind of volunteerism and community service. Those kinds of things are also one of the best things we can actually do for our own happiness. But I used to think that meant, just have to go and volunteer in a soup kitchen or something like that, or write a check. But if the Buddha said, give the best of what we have, right? Maybe it's giving, other skills I have in my life these days, doing some pro bono consulting to an organization I care about, sending a pile of my books to a charity that works with kids, that kind of thing. Answering questions for someone who's struggling with a question about mental health, for a friend of a friend. Giving some mentorship to young professionals. These are other ways I can give now, right, when I have these other skills that are developed. Right? So the best of what we have to give can change over time, and we can continue to give that. And maybe it's also doing, some more menial tasks and stuff too, when that's what's needed. Managing retreats, right? All these kinds of things as I'm seeing people comment. Right? Giving our presence. I think, the therapist, that's my job, right? Giving emotional support and safety. But it often is just giving our presence. Right? I guess, what do they bill by now? 42-minute hours, right? And I'm a little more generous than that, right? But for that 50 minutes or so, right? It's like really giving my presence. Giving my presence to my family, giving my presence to other people in my life. Like that's an absolute gift these days, that we are so eternally distracted, refracted, fractured in our attention. And people appreciate that gift of presence. And we can also give ourselves the gift of presence. Right? We do that in practice. When we try to sit for a half an hour or practice compassion or self-compassion. Right? Giving ourselves the gift of presence by stepping away from some of our distractions. Spending a day with ourselves. Right? But truly giving presence, Thich Nhat Hanh says, the most precious gift we can offer anyone is our attention. When mindfulness embraces those we love, they bloom like flowers. And I love anything Thich Nhat Hanh. That's just, and that also means the best of our presence, right? Not that half distracted, half on the phone kind of presence, but truly. So we give the best of what we have in that way as well. Giving forgiveness and the benefit of the doubt, giving space, giving time. Sometimes the people in our lives need a little bit of space, and that's the best gift we can give them. Right? Thinking about, flowers growing, right? They need a little space between them in order to blossom. And the Zen tradition of gardening or flower arranging, the space between the flowers, the plants, is actually what makes them beautiful and gives them the freedom to blossom. Right? So giving the people in our lives sometimes space. I think also giving and sharing from privilege that we may or may not have. Here I am, this white guy, right, sitting in a house I own. I mean, I'm still paying the mortgage, but these considerations that I have, incredible privilege in my life, and trying to give away, share some of that with people who are less privileged than me, maybe people of color, maybe people of different gender identities, different immigration status, different economic status, right? To share some of my privilege is actually one of the most amazing gifts that we can give, to amplify some other voices, invite someone to, do some writing or speaking, or, say, not me, like you should ask this other person to give this talk, or hire them for that job or something like that. Really giving our privilege, sharing our privilege is something we can do. And the Buddha did that too. Here's this guy, grew up, literally gated community, this guy, right? Like within the castle gates, right? Had his nanny, went out to go do some errands, right? Had to bring the nanny out to the city. And then that's when he encountered sickness, old age, and death, and was like, whoa, this is messed up. I got to figure out how to fix this. That's what got the Buddha on his path, right? Privileged guy renounced that, gave it away to go and try to heal the world in these different ways. So thinking about our privilege, giving space for more diverse, unheard voices, giving space and perspective to other ideas, not talking over people, right? Not mansplaining everything, not taking credit for stuff that's not ours, giving job opportunities, giving financial opportunities, giving speaking opportunities, right? Whatever it is in your life and your job, right? Can you amplify, elevate other voices? I think that's a big part of generosity too, that again, benefits everybody. And then the generosity of wisdom, the highest form of generosity, Dharma, so we call it in Buddhism, and giving freedom and liberation, right? We can do things for other people, right? Or we can teach them to do it for themselves, right? The kind of teach a man to fish thing, giving people more independence and interdependence, maybe, right? And when we share wisdom, there's a wonderful saying from 12-step programs that says, we only keep what we have by giving it away. We only keep what we have by giving it away. And I think that is so true of wisdom that we've accrued, right? And the skillfulness that hopefully we've accrued together on this karmic path, this dharmic path that we're on together. And every time we share some decent wisdom that we've picked up along the way, again, hopefully solicited, not unsolicited and mansplaining it to somebody, right? But it generates actually more wisdom and more compassion in the world, right? When we help someone uncover their own truth, their own wisdom, we've actually doubled the amount of wisdom in the world, right? Not just ours, but that other person has like their little take on it. And then they go on and they share it with the next person. They go on and share with the next person, right? I'm in this big lineage of teachers and mentors and therapists and Dharma teachers and, all these other self-help gurus in my life. And I'm just trying to give that away, right? In this bigger lineage, it just keeps evolving and changing. Right? So we keep giving it away. It grows and helps even more people. So certain forms of generosity around wisdom, they're generative. They exponentially create more good wisdom, more good karma in the world. Right? And we all have something. We all have some hard-won experience and wisdom that we, from our own mistakes, our own suffering, that we have learned. We all have that intrinsic value. We all have something to offer. And the Buddha said, we all have something we can give away. It's not just like we all have old socks we can give away, right? But we all truly have something to offer, which is kind of amazing to me. We really do all have something that we can offer. We've all lived a life of joy and sorrow. We have wisdom from those lessons that we can share. So giving our wisdom away. And so these are a few ways of thinking about generosity. And again, the role to me of mindfulness and compassion, the two wings of the bird that we talk about in the Dharma that carry us off to enlightenment, and they play a role, right? Compassion is important in generosity, not that, and wisdom. So it's not just that kind of doormat generosity, give everything away kind of foolishly, but having boundaries about how we do that. The near enemy, Buddhism says, of generosity is that kind of doormat generosity, that enabling, problematic forms of generosity, right? The Buddha specifically said, don't do this in a way that depletes you, right? So we give in a balanced way, right? With our own wisdom and discernment, right? That little bit of like a pinch, right? We just feel it a little bit, And so some common pitfalls, I think, that a lot of us get into. I think it's easy to get into giving. A lot of us kind of Buddhist types and Dharma types and Sangha types and meditation types, we tend to be generous. We tend to be like good people and virtuous, right? And often maybe sometimes in a way that's not so helpful to ourselves, right? To a fault a little bit. So I want us to actually be really cautious. It's a little bit of a different preaching to the choir talk than it would be maybe to the rest of the world. Like I really encourage you to be generous, but also to truly be generous to yourself. Right? Not in a way that's really self-defeating, because it can be so easy to fall into that because it feels good. Generosity really feels good. The research tells us, right? Boom, dopamine, serotonin, all this great stuff. So making space to be generous to ourselves, making space also to let other people be generous and not kind of hog all the generosity and all the opportunities to be kind. Right, knocking other people out of the way so I can, help this poor person on the street or something like that. That's getting a little bit egoic with it. I remember working at a IMS teen retreat many years ago, and there's a kid who was having a hard time, kind of emotionally, and we were talking about it in the kind of adult meeting, and I remember wanting to jump up and be like, "I'm a therapist. I got this. I can be the one to help out this kid." And the conversation kind of continued with the other adults about this kid who was struggling. And I realized that there was another volunteer on the retreat who'd actually been really supporting this kid throughout the whole retreat. And it clearly made a deeper connection with this kid. And they were a yoga teacher, and they weren't a therapist, right? Like me, important me, I've got my training as a therapist. And I was like, oh, like if I jump in here, I'm actually kind of blocking this person's opportunity to be generous. I actually have this amazing job where I get to help out young people all the time and help people every day. She maybe doesn't. Like, why don't I back off and allow her to be generous and let her know if she wants any support? Well, she's supporting this kid. I'm there for her. Right. So again, those of us that are naturally generous, we can sometimes get a little kind of twisted form of narcissistic. I'm the only one that can be generous. I'll be generous in the best way. And it's being stepping back, being generous with ourselves. I think too, for a lot of us, it can be hard to accept the generosity of others when it's actually really nice to let someone else, like if generosity is great, we should give other people a chance to be generous to us. Not say, no, I don't need that. I don't want that, right? It kind of sucks when someone, you give someone a present and they're like, no. Like, it's like, don't be that person. Accept the generosity, accept the compliment, accept the gift, right? Give that other person that chance to be generous. Make space for them to be generous. This is important. Just want to say a little bit more before I kind of shift over to questions. This time has gone by very fast. But kind of coming back to this, remembering to be generous with ourselves, right? Generous with ourselves, with material things to some extent, to be generous, let yourself occasionally, get that, just get yourself to take out, right? You'll be all right. Be generous with yourself, emotionally, really, truly, I think for a lot of us who are meditation types, right? Remembering to protect ourselves emotionally and be generous in that way too. And to be generous also, of course, with wisdom for ourselves. And I feel like we're doing a good job of that today. Taking time to practice, taking time to be together in community, to try to learn some wisdom, to try to share a little bit in a conversation in a few minutes. So just as compassion practices, right, start with people in our lives oftentimes that are easy to be compassionate with. And then we also want to make sure we bring ourselves into that circle of compassion, right? Same with generosity, right? Being a little bit generous with ourselves. And I think a lot about this idea of karma. And, I think I feel like karma is more complicated than like, if I'm generous, I'll get this thing back, right? And again, that's that kind of more problematic, conditional, intentional generosity. But there are these other ways, I think, that we can, in fact, be quite generous. They actually do end up karmically kind of trickling back out. And so I have a talk I did a few years ago where I kind of had fun playing with this idea of kindness and generosity and karma. And thinking about, I remember I had some teacher that was like saying, karma is not what goes around comes around, or that, if you cut someone off in traffic, you won't get a good parking spot. It's more complicated. And yet actually have started to research this and found that actually, in a sense, like if you are kind and generous and you let someone go in front of you in traffic, you might just get actually that good parking spot, right? If we're in rush hour traffic, right, someone cuts us off, we have like a bit of a choice, right? We can either let them go, or we can kind of, like keep crawling ahead and I'm not going to dare let them in, right? That kind of thing that we do. And that's dependent also on many factors, right? Am I in a good mood that day? Did I eat enough? Right. And if I was grumpy that day and had a bad day, I probably won't let them in. Right. If I'm not so stressed out, I can think, maybe they're just trying to, take their sick kid to the hospital or something like that. So some of it has to do with, right, past conditioning that day, or maybe the way we were raised, a little bit more selfish, and maybe even our grandparents' DNA. We actually know from, this interesting genetic research more and more these days, epigenetics, that actually some of what our grandparents and great-grandparents experienced, right? Genocide, enslavement, war, traumatic immigration stories, right? So many different things, right? Actually, that if they've experienced significant trauma, it actually changes the way our DNA expresses itself. Right? So some of that may play into what we almost might think of as our karma, right? My grandparents even may have had some bad experiences. Then I feel like more likely to go into fight or flight, or the world's not safe, and I better get in, into this lane while I'm getting, trying to get off the highway ramp or whatever it might be. On the other hand, right, maybe if our grandparents got some therapy and got some help that they needed, and I love this kind of idea that I've heard in the last few years of, training ourselves to be good ancestors to future generations, right? If I do that, my grandkids actually see the world a little bit differently, a little bit more openly. They're more able to feel comfortable being generous. If we feel safe, it's easier to be generous, right? There's things that get in the way, right? And what we also know is that when we're generous, it does kind of give us a hit of serotonin, which actually balances our mood, balances our anxiety. Dopamine, which actually makes us want to do more of it. Oxytocin, which is like the love, connection, attachment hormone that also kind of makes us feel warm and fuzzy in these different ways. And so if I'm generous today, I'm more likely to be generous tomorrow. And then my offspring is also more likely to be generous and that kind of thing. And there's this other very cool study, I'm blanking on, there are folks from Emory University, James Fowler and Nick Christiakis. Actually, Christiakis is at Yale. But they were studying what they call behavioral contagions. And they discovered this thing called downstream and upstream reciprocity, that actually, when we do something kind, it actually trickles out. So if I let someone go in traffic, right, they're actually more likely then, get home and maybe hold the door for someone, like for me at the gym, right? That next person's then more likely to, buy flowers for their partner on the way home, and then got to be nice to the kids and not kick the dog and that kind of thing, right? So it actually does trickle out. But also, when it makes us feel better, we actually become happier and more optimistic. When we become happier and more optimistic, it actually changes our perspective. So we see new opportunities when they arise. Our brains actually open up more. And so that when we pull into that parking spot, we're actually much more likely to see it, right? When we're out there looking for parking, if we're in a good mood, we're likely to encounter it. So maybe there is a little bit of karma to being nice on the highway and kind of coming back around for getting that parking spot for those of us that are stuck in our cars. So these are some things to think about. I think a lot actually about there's a friend of mine who, she's an interesting woman. She grew up in Pakistan, went to a Catholic boarding school, and had some struggles with alcohol, ironically, after she moved to the US. And she then got sober, and kind of her act of generosity toward the world is that she does just like let other people go in front of her in traffic. And sometimes that's like not the best thing, or depending on traffic that day, or the people behind you, right? Where's their karma? But again, when we just do these like little simple acts of generosity, the ripple effect, it's outward to these other people around us, 3, 4, 5 degrees of separation, acts of kindness going outward. It's inward, right? It makes me happier, right? I feel better. My DNA actually changes the way it communicates to future generations, right? So my, grandkids end up happier. I am a good ancestor in a sense in terms of making the world a better place now, making it a better place in the future. And so maybe that is, in a sense, what karma really is. If we can measure it scientifically, I don't know. But I do know that generosity, the research tells us that when we do it with those kind of boundaries around it, as the Buddha suggests, in a way that's not depleting ourselves, that when we give the best of what we have, when it does pinch just a little bit, with wisdom, with emotional support, with material support, we make ourselves happier, we make the world something of a better place now and into the future. So those are some of my thoughts on generosity, and this time that feels hard to be generous oftentimes of spirit, or frustrating. We don't see it in others, but we can still continue with our own acts of generosity and hope for the ripple effect that we can actually see. So I want to thank you again for being here for yourself, and that truly the merit of you being here, listening, practicing, is actually going to impact other people in your life, even if it feels like we're shouting into the void or sitting silently focused on our breath into the void in a challenging time in the world's history. But I want to thank you for being here for yourself, and I want to thank Sangha Live for having me here and hosting. And thank you all for being here for others in your life as well. So with that, I'll shift it over. People have questions or comments, you can just drop them into the chat. If you are shy, you can just direct message me. Kind of nice on Zoom sometimes, that we don't have to share our deepest stuff or feel a little self-conscious. But I'll just turn it over to questions right now. Thank you, Louise. People sharing songs. What a wonderful way to share. Managing retreats. Listening with presence. Everybody, you can also raise your hand. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, on the audio button. Just really an observation. It's just sort of made me reflect on times when I've been treated with generosity. And the one occasion that really sprung to mind for me was when I went into the supermarket. And it's the usual story, you go in, you only see in buy a couple of items, but you come out with an absolute armful. And that was a tempting thing, but coming out with an armful. And there was this lady who had a plastic bag, and she said, "Oh, do you want my bag?" And, with a smile on her face. And I know it sounds like a really, really simple thing, but I don't know, it just really touched me at the time. And sometimes it's not like big gestures or grand gestures. It's just sometimes the little simple things. And it was obviously her pleasure to give as well. So it's that sense, like you said, of being a good receiver as well as a good giver, isn't it? So it was just such a really, just a simple but lovely moment,
Yeah.
So,
And I appreciate that, because I do feel like the more tuned in we are, the more we practice mindfulness, and these contemplative practices, the more we can tune into that and take it in, right? When we see those acts of kindness and generosity, or when they're offered to us, we can make space to accept them and give someone else that wonderful opportunity, as you said, learning both the giving and the receiving of generosity or gifts in their own right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Someone else sharing the practice of looking people in the eye and smiling when we're out and about. I'm a New Englander, and those of you who aren't from the U.S., our kind of reputation here in New England, I think, because it's cold, right, is we're always like staring at the ground and rushing. And and just trying to slow down and like look back and look up and see people and acknowledge people as people is such an act of generosity that we can do. Well, thank you, Leslie, for generously sharing song. Beautiful. Sharing poems. Other comments?
All right. May I ask a question?
Please. Yeah, I can't see everyone's hands. I guess just go ahead. You think 3 years after all being on Zoom. Hi, Charles Lee. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks for a wonderful, wonderful talk. And yeah, and I was I live in New Mexico in the Southwest in the US now, but I was born in Connecticut. So I remember it being cold, but we didn't have the excuse of cell phones. Now, it's very interesting to try to walk around without your phone out, and say hello. Early in your talk, you mentioned neuroscience as a spiritual belief system, or a current spiritual belief system. Or maybe I'm reading too much into that, but I wondered if you could kind of talk a little bit more about, I guess, the parallels you see between neuroscience. My undergraduate degree is in neuroscience. And I went to school in the early 2000s. So I think that was like right after the decade of the brain. There was like, everything was about neuroscience. And, but I came to to a spiritual practice later, reached about 4 years ago. And, I was just wondering if you could just expound upon the parallels, or why we could see neuroscience maybe as a spiritual belief system, and how that'd be beneficial for our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a little bit of a kind of flip comment on my part, but I do also feel like it is, we have many different belief systems, kind of from different cultures and times and places throughout history around the world. And in many ways, those are being sometimes supplanted by science and neuroscience, and sometimes beautifully complemented by science and neuroscience. And I'm a big fan of trying to understand the science as best that I can, of contemplative practice, of mindfulness, of meditation, of compassion practice, of many of these practices that that the Buddha taught. And there's some great books on the topic. Rick Hanson's Buddha's Brain, for example, Altered Traits by Dan Goleman and Richie Davidson, some other very cool studies. But that point toward, the science of happiness, and those books in particular look at Buddhist practices. I have another friend who's actually looking more deeply at Buddhist values, the paramis or the paramitas, depending on what school of Buddhism you're from, and how those change the brain, like very literally, which is super awesome. And so I just find it really exciting, kind of looking at where there are parallels. I also want to say, I think, probably, Buddhism has probably gotten the most attention in terms of science, but I actually would imagine that many spiritual traditions, if we, in a sense, put them in the lab and looked at generosity in the way that's, true in practice in all religions or spiritual traditions, would probably have, look at, similar effects. And of course, there's so many common values between different religions and spiritual practices as well. So I just think and I think for many people who don't feel like religion in the way it's traditionally been taught, or that they were raised in, feels like it resonates with them in the 2024, I think science can be really helpful, and often ends up teaching the same lessons that spiritual traditions did, without some of the baggage that comes with the cultural aspects of spiritual traditions and spiritual hierarchies and structures and institutions, which you get people involved, it always becomes a mess. So probably happen with neuroscience at some point too. But yeah. Very cool. Thank you. So I have another really nice question here. Someone asking, if you're having a tough time, don't think you have a lot to give. How do we harness it? Be generous, and financially and emotionally, we feel like we're coming from an empty cup. I think finding, to me, someone suggesting, we can always listen. I also think that there are times that it is time to recharge. I don't want to say be selfish, but turn generosity toward ourselves, to allow ourselves to accept generosity when it's offered to us from others, or to maybe even, it can be hard, especially for those of us who are used to being givers and caregivers, to ask for generosity from others sometimes. The more specific we are about that, the better. Can I have an hour of your time to share some of my frustrations, or whatever it might be. And then also just giving ourselves generosity of wisdom by reading a self-help book, or a spiritual book, giving ourselves emotional protection. Maybe that's by setting some other boundaries in our lives, whether that's financial boundaries, whether that's emotional boundaries with other people we've been giving a lot to emotionally, that those are acts of generosity toward ourselves. And sometimes when we get that empty cup feeling, that's maybe what we need to turn toward. Or sometimes also just giving ourselves a little bit of material comfort. Get cozy, have a cup of tea, buy the latte, not just the drip coffee, if you can afford it on some days, or finding other ways to make yourself feel materially safe and comfortable. So that might be some of what you need too.
Thank you for answering that. Sorry, my video's not on. I feel like I would cry if I showed my face. Yeah, thanks for it.
Well, I hope you take good care of yourself. I think everybody here probably does too.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tom. You can say a word.
Sorry, I was having technical difficulties.
No worries.
No, I just maybe comment, and I think you're probably quite qualified as a therapist to answer. I was having a conversation today with my mother. We were having a coffee in a nice cafe, and she has a family friend. She was asking me how, basically, this family friend, he has a son. The son is an alcoholic, and no matter what's been given to him, he kind of doesn't appreciate. He's a self-destructive person, and it mirrors maybe a lot of what I've experienced in my life, and I think a lot of other people have as well. So my question to you probably is, how do you deal with people that are self-destructive? And yeah, how do you deal with people that are self-destructive in your giving to them, in your generosity towards them?
Well, you got 30 seconds to answer that one.
Yeah, go.
I'm just teasing. Yeah, I mean, I think we try to be generous in terms of patience, that sometimes, seeds are planted and take a long time to grow, and gently watering the seeds of progress where we see it. And that's that kind of like validating those 1 or 2 days sober, or 1 or 2 days clear-headed, or 1 or 2 days, or moments that we see those fleeting, best parts of that person, and really showing up for that, when that person is at their best, and validating that and acknowledging that and telling them how much we love seeing them like that, I think can be a way that we can be generous in that way. And then I think that tricky question of what's a generous boundary for us to set ourselves. And, someone who, I mean, I kind of dropped, a few recovery references. I've been sober for many years, and just sort of seen many people in my life, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, figure it out. But I think as soon as that, someone becomes ready or offers those glimpses of readiness, or more presence to themselves and people around them, more appreciation. We just want to really kind of jump on that with appreciation and recognition of those little fleeting moments, which can be hard to track. But again, mindfulness and compassion can help us see them when they do glimmer through. But it's a hard one. Yeah.
That was very good off the cuff.
That's very generous of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah. And thank you all very much. Yeah, just smiling, as people say, is an act of generosity. So let's just close with a smile to ourselves as an act of generosity. And for all of you suffering, we love you. Keep going, as they say in these places. So thank you again. This is a very sweet space for me to be in. So I appreciate the invitation in. So thank you.